Hello everyone and welcome to Cinderful Gaming. I hope you're all doing well, I hope you're all staying safe, and most of all, I hope you're all fighting that war against the Grey. And boy, should you be fighting that war against the Grey, especially if you are a Stormcast Eternals player at the moment, because we have a brand new Battletome for the Stormcast Eternals, the Disciples, the Scions, the mighty warriors of Sigmar themselves. This is going to be part one of a Battletome review. We aim to break down the Battletome review in smaller bite-sized chunks into different parts of the army book. This particular part of the Battletome review will focus on the allegiance abilities, enhancements and subfaction rules inside the Battletome. We'll go through, talk about all of the different rules in this section, and to talk about what we think is good, what we think is bad, and what we think is useful. I will say there is definitely some interesting things to point out in the initial stage of this as we talk about, I guess, a general overview. And that is, there is generally less of these in the book than what there used to be. You'll find with many of the enhancements, they've actually shrunk down. There's no longer 6 of everything. There is maybe 3, 4 of most things, and some things have even less, or some have more and have the more common 6 that we're used to, but not everything has to. There is no set number anymore. There's no more D6 roller table and have to have 5 different warlord traits. There's also not different warlord traits or different mount traits for different creatures within this Battletome, and I think this is an interesting thing. I remember seeing a time when in Warhammer Fantasy we had much the same thing where all the Battletomes would have, or all the army books as they were called back then, would have, say, a weapon skill 10 weapon. They would all have a +1 strength weapon. They would all have a 5+ ward artifact talisman thing. And that's not required, and that's what generic enhancements give us. It's a really cool system that we can use to get rid of all that bloat within a Battletome. Everyone has that 5+ ward save artifact in their Battletome anyway, or at least almost everyone does. And so put them in generic artifacts and give more interesting options to the Battletomes to make them really stand out. So, without further ado though, we're going to kick in to this review and we're going to look at the allegiance abilities first, and it was worth mentioning that we have both the Signs of the Storm, the old Stormcast rules, and we have also now had the Stormkeep rules put into our Battletome. So let's get cracking on and let's have a look at these particular rules. And so, first of all, as mentioned, let's talk about the allegiance abilities for the army. Now, to start off with, what the first choice we have to make with Stormcast is whether or not we're going to play as Scions of the Storm or as a Stormkeep army. These two very different styles of Stormcast army give you a load of different options and just sort of tactical ability on the table. Now, we'll get talking about them a little bit more in a second, but first of all, I want to talk about the generic rules we're going to get for being Stormcast, regardless of which one of these two options we pick. The first one of these is the Blaze of Glory rule. Now, this is really cool because we've always heard in the narrative that Stormcast sort of explode up in lightning when they die, and so they go back to the heavens, and so Blaze of Glory is a new rule for Stormcast that we first saw in the Dominion box set. It's a new rule where if a friendly Stormcast model is slain within 1 inch of an enemy unit, before removing that model, you roll a number of dice equal to the wounds characteristic of the slain model. Adding 1 to the number of dice is the roll if the model itself is a Thunderstrike unit, and for each 6+, the target unit that killed the model suffers 1 wound. Pretty cool. This is a great way, because we are an elite army with Stormcast, and even more so in the new book than ever before, you will find like these few extra mortal wounds you can do and chip away after you've already done a decent amount of damage and then start taking hits back can be really useful. The fact that this does work better on Thunderstrike obviously gives them a little bit of an edge over some of the old cast models, but, you know, it's a really cool, fun rule. The other one is obviously the generic rule where we get to pick our subfaction. So we get to pick a subfaction regardless of what we play, whether Scions of the Storm or Stormkeep once again, and you're going to be able to play Anvils of the Helden Hammer in either one. This opens the door up for a multitude of different sort of combinations between playing in those two styles of Stormcast list with also all these options for subfactions. Subfactions are really interesting and we'll talk about them later in the video, but there's a ton of options here and I think it can change up even the list of playing, say, Anvils of the Helden Hammer in Signs of the Storm compared to how you would play them in Stormkeep. There's some really interesting options there. Now, going into Scions of the Storm, the main rule they get is their Deep Strike ability. They can do a 1-for-1 thing where they place a unit on the table and one unit can then be set up in the heavens above to be put into reserve, which can then come down onto the table any turn before the end of turn 3, if I'm not mistaken, and then they can choose to deploy 9 inch away from enemy units and anywhere on the table that they want. Really cool. Stormcast are generally quite slow, though there are some general exceptions to that, but this is particularly great for armies that rely on slower moving Stormcast and Heavy to get them into position. This of course means that you're going to have to play very smartly when you do these deep strikes. You can't sort of expect to deep strike your paladins onto one side of the field and then to ever reach the other side of the field. It's just not going to happen. You need to use these tools with the Scions of the Storm's deep strike ability as like a scalpel. You need to put it in the right spot and get that charge off in the right spot of the table so that you can affect the battle properly and to your fullest effect. Now, Stormkeep, we've heard about these first in Broken Realms Marathi, and now they're a fully fledged part of the Stormcast Battletome, which is fantastic. I love Stormkeep rules. Now, the first one of these we get is Mordor Auxiliaries. This is where we can take 1 in 4 of our units in the Stormkeep army as Mordor Auxiliaries, aka a Cities of Sigmar unit, and these become coalition units within the army. What's also cool, in addition to this, we also get we can also add one to the bravery of any friendly Stormkeep unit, hollow int 12 inch of any Redeemer units in the army as well. So, nice little bravery buff there as well, on top of the coalition Cities of Sigmar units. And Cities of Sigmar has such a massive pool of units to pull from. I'm sure there are some great options in here. We then got Shield of Civilization. So this is a really fun rule. This, for me, is one of the most thematic ways to play Stormcast, I think. In the first and second battle rounds, if any of your friendly Redeemer units contest an objective wholly or partially within your territory, each model in the unit counts as 3 models for purposes of controlling the objective. Starting from the third battle round, this extends to all of the objectives on the table, which is just amazing. Counting as 3 models for your Redeemer units, this can be really strong. Redeemers are generally hard to shift, whether that be Liberators, Sequitors, or Vindictors, which are probably the best option out of all of them. They all can be really hard to shift with a decent amount of wounds on the table and a decent save for any of those options there as well. Not only this, but in addition, if an enemy unit finishes a charge move within 1 inch of any friendly Redeemer units that have this particular rule, on a 3+, they take D3 mortal wounds. I mean, it's not much, but, you know, an extra D3 mortal wounds just because your opponent charged you and you're an objective? Sure, why not? It means your opponent can't charge in things in a last grasp sort of hope, because there's every chance you're just going to kill them on impact. Next up, we have our command traits. Now, there's 4 options for this, and what should be said first is no longer with subfactions do we need to have a certain command trait based on what we are playing. There is no longer a lock-in for command trait, artifacts, or even command ability at all. You just get extra rules for subfactions, and we will go through all of that later, but this does mean that things like command traits, we have so many more options with how we can play and build our Stormcast Eternals list now. I'm a massive fan of how this has gone down in the Stormcast book, and I really hope more armies get to play like how Stormcast do, because it is an absolutely fantastic way to build armies. It just gives so much options in how you can build and piece together all these different moving parts. It really will create some wild, varied lists and just give you more options and more ways to play, and I can't wait to see what people come up with. But for now, let's talk about the command traits we have. And so, the first one we have is called Shock and Awe. So this is if your armies is Scions of the Storm army and your general is on the battlefield at the end of your movement phase. You subtract 1 from hit rolls that target friendly Scions of the Storm units that were set up in the phase until the end of that turn. This is effectively the old Scions of the Storm rule. We used to get this Shock and Awe rule for just part of the army rules, and now it's one of the command traits. I mean, we've got some other cool things already in the army, but it's cool to have this command trait. It is nice. Once again, it's only to the end of turn, so this is relying on you to get the charges off, so you definitely want to make sure you've got things to ensure you get those charges off, so you're actually making use of this particular Shock and Awe command trait's ability. Otherwise, it's just going to go to waste if you drop down all these units and then all of a sudden you no longer get any sort of benefit from it because you don't land any charges. Also, it's worth saying as well that you do get this when you drop down in the movement phase, so it means in the subsequent charge phase you're going to get that -1, so it means Unleash Hell will technically be at -2. Yes, you cannot stack the -2 but it does mean your opponent's bonuses aren't going to be counted in there. Really cool for charging things that are around, say like a Celestial Hurricaneum that's putting out +1 to hit auras or something like that. The next one we've got Staunch Defender. This is an oldie but a goldie, but it has changed massively and probably has taken a little bit of a nerf. And so this one now is just pretty simple. When you've got the ability from the Stormkeep army that allows you to roll a dice to determine the number of mortal wounds caused to an enemy unit by a friendly Redeemer unit when they charge you, as we've just talked about, from the Shield of Civilization rule, you can effectively re-roll that dice and potentially try and get some more mortal wounds in it. Nothing too fancy, but if you're going down that route, and this could once again be really clutch. I think this one is definitely, it's not going to be the most standout option, but this will win you games. Your opponent will have that model on a couple of wounds left, and he's just got to charge your last 2 or 3 Redeemer models and kill 1 or 2. And unfortunately for him, he takes D3 mortal wounds, you roll a 1, but then you re-roll it, do a 3, and you kill that model when it charges you. It could definitely be a game winner of an ability right here. Envoy of the Heavens is next, and so this is if a friendly model is slain wholly within 12 inches of the general. You can add 1 to save rolls for that unit against any attacks that target that unit until the end of that particular phase. This is really cool. Now, this obviously has some counterplay, and your opponent, if they sort of spread their fire across your army, you're not actually going to get to use this ability, but this is really good for sort of protecting like maybe Death Stars in the army. If you've got a particular unit, of like 10 or 15 models, say a large unit of Protectors or Vindictors or something like that, your opponent starts to target them and all of a sudden they get a free +1 to save, they get a free all-out defense effectively. This could be really important to just keeping your units alive. It means you can sort of bank on this. You might lose a couple of models from the first initial hit when you don't have up your +1 save, but it makes you harder to remove later, and it also potentially can save you some command points. A really strong command trait. The last one, Master of the Celestial Menagerie, is a personal favourite of mine. So this is if your general is a monster and is on the battlefield, you literally subtract 1 from rune rolls for all attacks that target any of your Stormcast Eternals monsters. This is just downright amazing. This makes the All Dragon list just good straight off the bat. -1 to wound. I mean, Thundertusk lists were getting around for a while in the early days of Age of Sigmar with that -1 to wound. It was absolutely brutal. It still is pretty nasty on some other things, but yeah, a -1 to wound thing across your whole army just as long as that model is alive. Put this on something like a Star Drake that's already got a 3-up save. He's going to be hard to remove anyway. You can put him on that 2-up with his own all-out defense. Pretty darn solid, I think. Next up, let's take a look at the Artefacts of Power. Now, I did mention this is massively shrunk. There are 3 different sections in the army for this, and there are 3 options for each. We've seen in the Stormcast Eternal, we've lost the particular standards, and we've lost the lanterns, and they've been replaced with just weapons, armors, and other artifacts. So for starters, we've got the Stormforged weapons. First of all, we've got the Blade of Heroes, where we pick 1 melee weapon, we reroll hit rolls that target a hero or monster. Pretty solid and pretty good on sort of our characters we want to be going and fighting other big things. A Hammer of Might is, once again, pick 1 of your user's melee weapons, and your unmodified 6s do double damage, but my particular favourite here is the Fang of Dracothian. So you pick 1 of your melee weapons. If any wounds are inflicted by this weapon and are allocated to an enemy model, that enemy model suffers a mortal wound at the end of each turn. This is a really fun artifact. If you've played Gloomspite kits before and you've had Scragrot on the table, his ability to sort of shoot people with the Bad Moon on a stick and do the mortal wound to someone that just keeps on happening at the end of every turn is pretty darn cool. And the fact this happens at the end of every turn is awesome for the Fang of Dracothian. This could be really cool and sort of like a sort of suicide style character. Send a Knight Zephyros in and do a wound with their axes, get it through on something big, and potentially just watch that model whittle away as it takes a mortal wound every turn. Could be a really cool thing. I personally, this is my favourite out of the 3. Though the double damage and is pretty nice, and rerolls to hit is nothing to sort of look away from with the Blade of Heroes, because rerolls are so hard to come by now. Armor wise, we've got 3 options again. We've got the Drake Scale Armor, where you can reroll save rolls against attacks that have a damage characteristic of 2 or more. Pretty cool. This is especially good on sort of like your larger models, because obviously damage 1 doesn't mean as much against them. So you take sort of your normal saves, but you get those re-rollable saves against those sort of high damage attacks that are going to really lower your monsters. Mirror Shield for me though is the one that I personally like. The bearer cannot be targeted by a shooting attack unless the shooting unit is within 9 inch of it. This can be really good for keeping things like a Star Drake or any of your other characters sort of alive for as long as they need to. If you've got a really important like small character, something like a Knight Relictor or a Lord Relictor or a Wizard or something in the backfield that you really wanted to keep alive, a Mirror Shield could be a great way to do it. Because it doesn't say they can't draw line of sight, it says they can't be targeted. So this is really cool for stopping things like Luminous Sentinels. We then got the Artefacts of the Tempest, which are sort of like our miscellaneous sort of things next to it. And first of all, we've got the Quicksilver Draft. This is a once per battle ability and an effect. All of these ones are in fact once per game, which is pretty cool. I like the sort of once per game ability artifacts. They give some sort of interesting play on the table. I'd like to see more of them and more artifacts be once per game. It'd be a really cool thing. I really like the whole sort of having to plan the timing and the use of those particular artifacts is nice. But anyway, Quicksilver Draft once per game. At the end of the charge phase, you can say they'll drink the draft. They get the fight first ability, so they fight first in the following combat phase. Really cool. Luckstone is nice with the ability to sort of choose the result of one hit, wound, save, or charge roll once per game. Can be really, really clutch on some particular things. And the Obsidian Amulet, which is once per battle at the start of your hero phase, you can ignore the effects of spells and endless spells that target the bearer. This is a huge one, and probably I think the one that ekes it out. The Quicksilver Draft is also really good on some more killy characters, but generally Stormcast don't have too many. I think maybe if you're managing to get like a Knight Zephyros up there into your opponent's wizards or something like that, it could be really cool with a Quicksilver Draft to make sure they do it before they get sort of smacked by something protecting the wizard or something like that. Could be really cool. But there are some solid options here in all of these things here, and some good choices to be made between all these different artifacts of power. Next up, we've got the Spells and Prayers. Now, both of these have some really cool options in there. Prayers has dropped down to 3 options, but the Lore of the Storms has got 6 options, but we do no longer have a sort of second lore. We used to have the sort of smaller lore that some of our other characters could take. I believe it was Lore of Invigoration. Now it's all just the Lore of the Storms, so one single spell lore. First of all, we've got Lightning Blast, which is a casting value of 5, and it pretty much targets the closest enemy unit. If 2 units are the same distance, you get to pick. And it does D3 mortal wounds to them. Pretty cool. This can be really long range as well. It can sort of be cool for a first round sort of mortal wound shell out if you can't get anything else in range and your wizard's got nothing else to do. Really cool. Azerite Halo, casting value of 5 and a 12-inch range. As well, this is just for this one, if the caster is a knight, or 18-inch if the caster is a lord or draconith. Now this is something common amongst the 2 things here, and throughout a bunch of the abilities in the whole book as well. You sort of have these 2 knight and lord or draconith levels of character, which is really cool seeing them actually put that into play, that our knights are sort of our lesser characters for the Stormcast Eternals, and our lords and the Draconith are the much more higher ranking, so thus get better command abilities. It's a cool thing to have, I think, for the 2 different types of characters, and definitely gives you some cool options, really playing into that nice little bit of lore there. But anyway, Azerite Halo, you pick one of your units wholly within range. If a save roll for that unit is a 6, they will pretty much reflect a mortal wound back at their opponent. Celestial Blades, casting value of 5 and the same 12 and 18-inch range depending on what character you are. You pick one unit wholly within range and you get +1 to wound for that unit on their melee attacks. Nice. Chain Lightning, casting value of 6 and again 12 and 18-inch range depending on what character you are. Pick one enemy unit within range and they suffer D3 mortal wounds, and then you roll a dice for each enemy unit within 6 inch of the unit you first targeted, and on a 3+, they also suffer D3 mortal wounds. However, I think the best 2 spells are these last 2, so Thundershock, casting value of 6 and 12 and 18-inch range, depending on what character you are. You roll a dice for each enemy unit within range of the spell, and on a 3+, that unit is -1 to wound. That is amazing on a Lord level wizard. 18-inch range, and 2/3 of those units in range of that Lord level wizard or Knight level wizard, depending on what you're using, are going to be -1 to wound. An amazing debuff spell. And if that wasn't good enough, you've then got Starfall, casting a value of 5 and 12 and 18 inch range. You pick a point on the battlefield and roll a dice for each enemy unit within 3 inches of that point. If you get that 3+, they can't pile in. Another really, really strong spell. Yes, you do only have, I guess, a 60% chance of those particular spells going off and actually work on the units you want them to, but really, they are amazing. There's some great utility there in your Stormcast Eternal Wizards to have access to these particular spells. Now, looking at the prayer scriptures, we've got 3 different options here. Divine Light is the first one with a prayer level of 3, so you need to roll a 3+ to get it. 12 and 18 inch range. Once again, you pick one enemy unit in range and you can reroll hit rolls of 1 that target that unit. Once again, rerolls. This is just really good because rerolls are so rare to come by now. And also, what's great about this is you can bring your opponent's unit down with this because you get to pick one of your opponent's unit, not your own. Your opponent can't sort of counterplay into it. If your opponent if you're sort of using this on their unit, you're going to target them. Your opponent can do everything they want, but you're getting the buff against them. There is some counterplay to this. Obviously, if you target this, your opponent's just going to spend all his command points. But if your opponent's spending all your command points there to keep the unit you've used this buff on alive, they're not spending them elsewhere. We can sort of make, you know, the changes over. Translocation is pretty nice as well with another casting value of 3, 9 and 12 inch range though on this one, and it's pretty much your standard sort of teleport. 9 inch away from enemy units, all that sort of jazz. Blessed Weapons is the last one of the prayers, and at a casting value of 3, it's a 12 and 18 inch range. You get the Exploding Sixes rule, where rolling a 6 to hit on the dice generates 2 wound rolls instead of 1. Some solid spells and prayers there. I really do particularly like Thundershock and Starfall from the spells, though Azerite Halo and Celestial Braids and Chain Lightning and even Lightning Blast, all those spells there are solid. I think they've all got a use and a place in an army. The prayers definitely all are great as well. Blessed Weapons for rerolls, Divine Light there as well, and Translocation is awesome. Next we have the mount traits. So first of all, we've got Etheric Swiftness. This can be put on a Griff Charger Dracoth or Dracoline, and it gives that model a 6-inch pile-in. Very solid, useful little ability here. Now we've then got Light of the Young Stars, which can only be put on a Star Drake, and this replaces or instead can be used instead of one of your other Monstrous Rampage. I really like that we've got a couple of these actually that work as Monstrous Rampages. This is really cool. I was hoping that, you know, monsters might see their own sort of unique Monstrous Rampages, but this is definitely a good place to be. Maybe without clogging up the game too much with every monster having their own one. You've got these cool mount traits that can give you some unique ones for your character monsters. Very cool. This one in particular, you can choose this instead of any one of your normal ones. You pick one enemy unit within an inch and roll a dice. On a 3+, you subtract 1 from hit rolls from that unit in the following combat phase. It's cool. Celestial Instincts is really great with retreat and either shoot or charge later in the turn. Very, very solid. Once again, like Etheric Swiftness. Envoy of Lightning, if this model is set up with the Signs of the Storm, you roll a dice for each enemy unit within 10 inch. And on a 4+, that unit suffers D3 mortal wounds. Scintillating Trail is -1 to unbinding rolls, trying to stop Stormcast Wizards casting their spells that are within 12 inch of that particular hero. Very, very nice. And then Thunderous Presence, once again, another Monstrous Rampage one. This one available to all the monsters in Stormcast Eternals. You can pick one enemy unit within an inch and roll a dice, and on a 3+, that unit cannot receive commands in the following Battle Shock phase. Now that is massive. Really, really strong one there. I really like that. Once again, there's a lot of options in here. I would not be against potentially, like when you're trying to get enhancements, get extra mount traits to get more of these into my army, because some of these are really, really cool and give you a ton of different utility with a bunch of different pieces. Next up, we've got command abilities. Now, these are a unique enhancement for the army. It actually comes on that particular header. And what's really cool about this, I did mention how like the subfactions don't lock you into even command abilities. So a bunch of these are command abilities sort of based off the ones we've had for previous subfactions. First of all, we've got Call for Aid. Now, all of these particular command abilities are once per game abilities, which is really cool. Now the first one here is when a friendly Redeemer unit is destroyed, you can set up an identical Redeemer unit within 12 inches of hero and 9 inches away from enemy units. Really cool. It's pretty much the old Hammers of Sigmar ability, but a little bit better. There's no need to roll a 5+ or anything like that. You just get a brand new Redeemer unit that's identical to the one destroyed on the table. This could be really good if you've got something like a 15 block of Vindictors on the table your opponent is having to charge into, and has just finally destroyed that 2-up armor save Redeemer unit, and finally they're back. Steadfast March, once again, once per battle at the start of the movement phase, you can get a run and charge on one of your units. Really nice. Thunderbolt Volley is in your hero phase. You can pick one Justicar or Angelos unit, and they can shoot in your next hero phase. Angelos units and Justicar units include things like Judicators, Vanguard, Raptors, and a bunch of those things there. And you've got Unleash the Hatred. Once per battle, you can use this at the start of combat, and you have to pick a Paladin unit to use it on. They gain +1 attack. This combines really well with some of the other abilities we can get for Paladins. I definitely think there's a solid Paladin build in the army. Lastly, we've got Final Thunderstrike, where at the start of the combat phase, you get an extra +1 to all your Blaze Glory rules. So all your detonating Stormcast do that little bit extra mortal wound damage. There is a ton of cool use to these, and the fact they're only once per game abilities does make them really fun to use, because it really does require some really good planning and strategy to use them to get the right effects out of them and get the most out of them, most certainly. And so lastly in this video, we're going to talk a little bit about the sub-factions within the army. So this is just, once again, I want to talk about how sort of minimal the sub-faction rules are, and now the ability that we've got to sort of combine this through all the different things we've talked about, whether that be the particular unique enhancement like the command abilities or artifacts, or the ability to play with Signs of the Storm and command traits and all that sort of stuff. I really do think there's some really interesting ways you can build armies. And what this does give Stormcast is maybe something the last book lacked, was longevity. I think the ability for all these different rules and all these varied rules as well, there is definitely nothing that sort of doubles up, and there's certain paths you can go down, and there's a lot of viable options within the book. I think this gives options for the army to remain viable for a very long time. It's able to adapt to whatever the meta can throw at it. With a large amount of war scrolls in the army and some really sort of expansive rules like this, you've got an army that can definitely change up and adapt to whatever comes to face it. Now, with that said, let's talk about the Storm Host. So first of all, we've got the Hammers of Sigmar. This is one of the ones we've been shown. You get a 6-up ward whilst your units are wholly within 12 inch of an objective. Solid. This works really well with Stormkeep in particular, or if your opponent leaves objectives unguarded, works really nice with Signs of the Storm. Hallowed Knight, so this is if a model dies and it's slain within 3 inch of an enemy unit, on a 4+, that model can fight before it is removed. Really cool, and what's awesome about this is it's slain within 3 inch, so if your opponent shoots it off or magics it off or does anything like that, those Hallowed Knights will be trying to fight when they die. Celestial Vindicators, 1 unit that charge per turn, can get exploding 6s to hit. This means, once again, that if they roll a 6 to hit, they get 2 wound rolls instead of 1. Really cool. This combines really nice with things like Sequitors that get exploding hits and a 5-up ward, depending on having to choose either their empowered weapons or their empowered shields. This means if a Sequitor unit charges, it gets the best of both worlds, where it can empower its weapons with this particular ability and also get its empowered shield effect for that 5-up ward in combat. Anvils of the Helden Hammer, so at the end of the charge phase, you roll 2d6 for each enemy unit within 1 inch of each friendly Anvils of the Helden Hammer unit. If the roll is greater than the enemy's bravery, the first 2 wounds caused by attacks made by that enemy unit are ignored. I mean, this is situational and very, very wordy. You've got a lot of hoops you sort of need to jump through, and this definitely doesn't work as well against units that sort of have very high bravery, and there's a lot of strong armies at the moment that have high bravery. But you never know, should, I guess, this sort of change and we start to see more low bravery armies come into the game, this could be a really interesting command trait, or rather Storm Host ability. Knights Excelsior, once per turn, you can pick 1 Paladin unit in the combat phase. That Paladin unit, if it is outnumbered, they get +1 hit and wound. Solid, and as we saw, there's a Paladin sort of command trait you can pick for +1 attack. This could be a really nice little combo there. Celestial Warbringers, once per phase, you can reroll 1 hit, wound, or save. Solid stuff there. Once again, this combines well with like hero phase attacks with some of the shooting abilities and stuff like that. The Tempest Lords, when you attempt to charge, you can reroll 1 of the dice in the charge roll. Very, very solid. And then Astral Templars, probably perhaps, I think the one that's going to be used a lot at the moment is your army is pretty much immune to monstrous rampages. This is really strong at the moment with a monster meta and sort of the whole theme of the game at the moment being centered around monsters. A really good ability to have at the moment. But that is all the stuff we're going to talk about in this video today. Next up, we're going to look at some other stuff throughout the book, and we'll slowly work our way through in these little bite-sized chunks of the Battletome. Hope you've enjoyed the video, and if you have, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. Well, thank you for watching the video. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And while you're at it, if you'd like to come chat more with me and other members of our fine community here at Cinderful Gaming, you can do so by coming and joining our Discord, of which there is a link in the description of the video to go and join. Also, if you'd like to help support the channel in another way, you can do so either by Patreon, YouTube members, or by going and purchasing some merch on our Teespring store. You can find the links to all three in the description of the video, once again, to Patreon, YouTube members, and to our merch store on Teespring. But also, we'd like to give a special shout out to everyone who helps support the channel via Patreon and YouTube members. So, thank you to our patrons Christian Weir, James, Soren, Chaos Spawn, AJC, Kenny Lowell, Outer and Shop First, Andrew Bowen, Nathan Fee, Tim Newman, The Rising Ape, Cure Dynamic, Agu, Anthony B, MJ, and Dynat226. And a special thank you as well to our YouTube members Green Roots Gaming, Kenton Young, Steve T, The Real Zeop, Chris Wallace, Turai12, Vinny, Lock Lorick, Matt Mollin, Becca Kinska Groupie, The Johnny84, and El Mapache. Thank you as well, a special thanks especially to Lady Witchfox Art, who does all the amazing artwork for the channel. An absolute legend of a person. And then thank you as well to the legend that is Xmorphic. He does so much amazing work in the background of our Discord server, making sure everything works and looks nice and pretty there for us all to enjoy. So that's enough said from me though. Thank you all for watching. Once again, stay safe everyone, stay well, and most of all, keep fighting that war against the Grey. Ciao for now.